Well, gas prices, they are set to soar too. That's because we're about to start exporting gas from the East Coast. There's no limit to the amount of gas that can be sent overseas. Gas production in Australia is going to have to triple to service this new export market. Yet at the same time, New South Wales is being threatened with a gas shortage. And what are the price implications? What is the story with gas in Australia? Reporter Jess Hill has gone to the big and small end of town and out to the gas fields of New South Wales to investigate the high price of gas.
It's a frosty winter's morning here in the tiny town of Wee Waa in northwestern New South Wales.
Hi, I'm Dave Alexander. I'm an owner with my wife of the Wee Waa Motel. We're a family-run business and we've been here for just over 4.5 years.
The Wee Waa Motel is just north of the Pilliga Forest, home to the state's biggest undeveloped coal seam gas field. But Dave Alexander doesn't want to talk about gas mining. He wants to talk about gas prices.
When we first came in, the kitchen was predominantly electric, but what we've done, we bought in new gas grillers and everything and converted almost to gas, which was the economic way for us to go then. And we did a deal with one of the main suppliers, Gas, and we were getting it about 73 cents a litre.
The gas was cheap and Dave Alexander was happy. Then late last year, something unexpected happened.
It went from 73 to $1.03 or $1.04 a litre, and now we've been told on the grapevine that this month it's going to go up again. And if it goes up more than 3 or 4 cents a litre, we'll just re-go to electric again.
Dave Alexander and his wife run the motel on a tight budget, which is why they went with gas in the first place. Going back to expensive electricity isn't a good solution, so they've come up with a different idea.
And I've already had it quoted for a major system on the roof for solar, because the only way we recoup the monies is by continuing to increase tariffs, which doesn't work.
Did they say why they were raising the prices?
No, nothing at all.
And they didn't actually announce the first?
No, we knew when the chap had come out in the tanker, filled the tanks we've got around the side, and we got the bill.
The rude shock Dave Alexander got from his gas bill is about to be shared by people all over Eastern Australia. Wholesale gas prices are set to triple because on the East Coast, we're about to start exporting gas for the first time. For big domestic gas users, this is very bad news.
We're seeing prices leap from historical averages of sort of $3 to $4 a gigajoule to $9 to $12 a gigajoule or more.
Ben Eade is the Executive Director of Manufacturing Australia. He says domestic gas prices are now rising to meet what the North Asian market is prepared to pay, and they're prepared to pay the highest gas price in the world.
The fact is, high energy costs are killing industry in Australia, and high gas costs in particular.
A new report commissioned by industry groups and prepared by Deloitte Access Economics says that these skyrocketing gas prices will damage the Australian manufacturing sector to the tune of $118 billion over the next 7 years and lead to a loss of more than 14,000 jobs.
The impact of this issue on domestic manufacturing and domestic heavy industry is significant and couldn't be more urgent. We've already seen manufacturers close plants because of the impact of either supply shortages, market uncertainty, or skyrocketing prices for gas.
Even in Queensland, where the supply of coal seam gas has increased by more than 400% in the last decade, multinational mining companies are struggling to find gas. In February, Rio Tinto announced that it was getting barely any offers for gas to supply its Yarwun alumina refinery, which sits within sight of the LNG hubs that are being built in Gladstone Harbour. Rio Tinto says it still doesn't know where its gas will come from next year.
When you have world-class businesses operating large-scale plants in Australia that are all of a sudden going to be potentially wiped out because of a train wreck coming down the line not of their making, you have to start to wonder whether there's something not quite right with the dynamics of the East Coast gas market.
As industry screams blue murder over rising gas prices, the Prime Minister has been overseas selling a different story. At the Texas branch of the Asia Society, Tony Abbott was the guest speaker at an event sponsored by Chevron, BHP Billiton and ConocoPhillips. Our Prime Minister had some exciting news to share.
Australia will soon be the world's #1 exporter of liquefied natural gas. We are already the world's largest exporter of black coal.
Thanks to Queensland's coal seam gas boom, Australia is set to overtake the Gulf state of Qatar as the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas.
Affordable, reliable energy fuels enterprise and drives employment. It is the engine of economic development and wealth creation. And Australia should, we really should, be an affordable energy superpower, using nature's gifts for the benefit of our own people and the benefit of the wider world.
But energy in Australia is anything but cheap. We pay some of the world's highest electricity prices. They're double what they were a decade ago. Now we're paying record prices for gas.
Gas price rises have been overshadowed by electricity price rises in the last few years. We all know electricity price rises have gone up by about 80% since 2009. But gas prices have gone up too. They've gone up by 50% over the same period, and we're expecting them to go up by another 20 to 30% over the next few years.
Martin Jones is a consumer advocate with the Consumer Utilities Advocacy Centre. He says until now, the gas price rises have been largely due to the billions that have been spent on gas pipelines in the last few years, which we have to pay for through our gas bills. Now gas prices are increasing even more, rising to meet the new export price. Martin Jones says these price hikes are likely to hit hardest in Victoria because Victorians are the biggest users of gas in the country.
Victorian households use so much, an increase in gas prices, as expected, will lead to increases of gas bills of several $100s.
Australians are already struggling to pay their energy bills. According to the social services agency ACOS, a growing number of Australians are in what's called energy poverty, which means they're having to choose between using electricity and things like food and other essentials. It's not just affecting pensioners or people on the dole, it's hitting families like Andrea's. Andrea lives in the coastal Melbourne suburb of Frankston with her husband and their 5 children. Her family already has $3,000 worth of gas and electricity bills they can't pay. They now pay fortnightly instead of quarterly just to keep up.
Currently, I pay $150 a fortnight towards electricity, and I pay $80 a fortnight to gas, and that's just for my usage. That's not going to cut into the debt.
Wow, that's $80 a fortnight for gas.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel about the prospect of a 20 to 30% gas price rise in Victoria that's supposed to be kicking in right now?
I know that there's families a lot worse off than us, and if we're struggling, I just dread to think about the situations that they're in and what can you do? I mean, these are essential services. So do you just go into debt, or do people stop heating their houses and potentially have sick children? Or, I mean, I know the elderly, I know when my father was alive, he'd sit in one room under blankets because he had this perception that he couldn't afford to heat his house.
Andrea says things get scary in winter because her gas bills are 5 times higher then than they are in summer. Their rented house has gas ducted heating, but this winter she can't afford to turn it on.
We've stopped using that altogether for this winter because we just can't continue going on the way we have been. We can't accrue any more debt to our gas and electricity provider.
So what are you doing for heating?
So we have a gas space heater in the little lounge dining room. So we live in one room, basically, at the moment. I put the clothes horse in front of that gas heater and I stick the mountains and mountains and mountains of washing that you can imagine I have with 5 children and a tradesman husband, and I try and dry them off in front of that heater as much as I can.
At night, the temperature in Frankston drops to around 6 degrees. But Andrea can't afford to leave the heater going all night, so she sets the heaters in her children's rooms on timers so that they can kick in for half an hour as they go to sleep and switch back on first thing in the morning when they wake up.
But I've definitely noticed the kids have been waking a lot more overnight because they are getting cold during the night. So hot water bottles. So, the kids have all got their own hot water bottle that they take off to bed with them,
How do you feel about how all of this is being managed by our politicians?
I think we're facts and figures on a piece of paper, basically, and we're averaged out. And maybe people like our families are expendable or collateral damage. But I think if they actually came and lived like we lived, they'd have a better understanding. It's probably been a long time since they've had to put their clothes in front of the heater that the children are sitting around because they can't afford to use the dryer. So, look, I don't blame anybody for the situation that we're in, but to put us under the crunch anymore,
It's not just families being hit by the gas price. Incitec Pivot is Australia's largest manufacturer of fertiliser. It uses gas as a feedstock for its fertiliser production, so the price of gas is critical to their business. Last year, when Incitec Pivot went to renew its gas supply contract, it could only find a supplier willing to sign a short-term contract and at a staggering price. This new gas is going to cost them an extra $50 million a year for a plant that last year only made a $25 million profit. Incitec Pivot was planning to spend nearly $1 billion on a new factory in Newcastle, but it's changed its mind. It's building it in the United States instead, where gas is cheap. Incitec Pivot's Chief Communications Officer is Stuart Murrahy.
Under the current circumstances where we see a gas price that is sitting at around $10 to $12 delivered, compared to a gas price in the US that's sitting around $4 and $5, there's just no comparison. And the price spike on the east coast of Australia is having that impact on a range of our colleague companies. They are making decisions to develop offshore rather than in Australia, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed for the national interest of Australia.
The US fracking boom has flooded the country with cheap gas and driven a boom in its manufacturing sector. Now, as they prepare to export some of that gas, there's a national debate about how to protect the local economy from high international prices.
At least the Americans are having the debate. We in Australia really have never had this debate that understands what's best for the national interest of the country in terms of employment, value-adding regional communities. We can have our cake and eat it too. We can have a great export industry, and we can have industries in Australia.
Every other gas exporting country in the world reserves gas for domestic use, and the US is about to do the same. In fact, Australia is the only country that doesn't do this. Instead, our policy is to allow international oil and gas companies to export unlimited amounts of gas.
Any other country in the world, any other developed country in the world will be ensuring that that clean, relatively clean energy is preserved, or some part of it preserved for the national economy. I think it's just a gross oversight in energy policy in Australia.
The Liberal Western Australian Premier, Colin Barnett, presides over a gas-rich state that's been exporting gas for decades. In 2006, the WA state government legislated that 15% of the state's gas be reserved for domestic consumption. It's what's called a domestic reservation policy. Last year, Colin Barnett told Radio National he can't understand why the federal government isn't doing the same for the rest of the country.
I think Australia should simply impose, similar to Western Australia, 15% reservation for the domestic economy. I mean, why should we have on the East Coast now energy consumers in industry saying we've got a shortage of gas and the price is going to go through the roof when we're supplying vast amounts of gas into international markets? No other country in the world would do that.
Industry groups are calling on the government to introduce a national interest test to ensure that local gas supply is taken care of before more export contracts are signed. This is what happens in Canada and in the US. But Federal Industry Minister Ian Macfarlane has no interest in this idea.
Well, if you're talking about closing our borders and restricting free trade, then that's going to be a very lonely argument. If you're asking me to put Australia, a low population, high export orientated country, in a closed border position, then I'm not prepared to do it.
Energy-poor countries like Japan and South Korea are prepared to pay top dollar for Australia's gas. Ian McFarlane says that if Australians want to use gas, they're going to have to get used to paying top dollar too.
Well, in terms of internationalisation of gas prices, gas is the last commodity to receive an international price. And the reality is that just as we've had an international price for oil for over 4 decades, gas is now being sold in Australia at an international price. That's the reality of a world market, and to protect one section of the Australian market to the detriment of those people who want to take the risk and invest the billions of dollars it takes to develop a CSG project simply doesn't make economic sense, and we'll just see that investment go somewhere else.
When the giant LNG hubs in Queensland start exporting gas to North Asia next year, gas extraction will need to triple to meet the new demand. Some of that gas will be coming from the Moomba gas fields in the Cooper Basin, owned by Santos, which have traditionally supplied around half of New South Wales's gas needs. The Federal Industry Minister says that as of 2016, New South Wales will run short of gas, and hundreds, if not thousands of jobs will be at risk because of low supply and the high prices that he says will result from that. Despite this, the federal government has agreed to sell more gas to Japan as part of a new free trade agreement.
Well, what we'll give to Japan is the reliability of supply based on a contract. And again, those consumers in Japan who are prepared to sign up to contracts have benefited from a long-term reliable supply from Australia.
But I'm just wondering the difference between promising that energy security to Japan and then threatening New South Wales with a gas shortfall.
We're not promising, we're making available gas.
The Minister says that if New South Wales has a gas shortage, it's up to the New South Wales government to fix it.
Well, that's an issue for the New South Wales government to resolve. They have access to gas fields and they can ensure that those gas fields are developed.
New South Wales produces only 5% of its own gas and has left the vast majority of its coal seam gas in the ground. The biggest undeveloped gas fields in the state lie beneath the Pilliga State Forest in northwestern New South Wales. It's here that Santos wants to drill 850 coal seam gas wells, which it says could produce up to half of the state's gas needs. Santos Vice President James Balderstone insists that if Santos can tap the gas in the Pilliga, prices in New South Wales will come down.
By having the benefit of having the gas resource on the doorstep of Sydney, it means that that gas can be the cheapest gas that's produced and then sold into the market at the cheapest possible price.
And he's promising that should the project be approved, Santos will sell the gas to New South Wales customers and not to Asia.
I'll sell it to Sydney because I make a better margin from it. Why would I try and sell that gas into Victoria, South Australia or to Queensland when the closest port of call is Sydney?
But you'd certainly want to sell it into Asia if you can get double or triple the price, wouldn't you?
No, not necessarily at all. Remember, I'm on a long-term supply into Sydney. We've sold gas into Sydney at Santos for 40 years. You know, these customers you're talking about, the mums and dads, the small to medium businesses, the large industrial customers, I want to be selling those guys gas in the next 40 years.
In return for this promise to sell gas to New South Wales, the state government has declared the Narrabri project to be one of strategic importance and has agreed to fast-track the approvals process. But the guarantee to supply New South Wales is still little more than a gentleman's agreement. New South Wales Energy Minister Anthony Roberts.
You can't say that a molecule produced from the Pilliga, should it go ahead, would not end up in Northeast Asia. Certainly in my discussions with Santos and AGL, they are committed to supplying the New South Wales domestic marketplace.
But it's clear that the Energy Minister has some concerns about this gentleman's agreement.
What would give me greater certainty, and your listeners greater certainty, is actually how much is being contracted for overseas in the first place, what has been contracted for, the volume, and what are in those contracts. The best answer for the people of New South Wales and this nation is to actually have an open and transparent gas marketplace. And quite frankly, do we have it now? No, we don't.
There's certainly strong indications that Santos does intend to sell some of its gas into the Sydney market. But the company is also considering a plan to build a pipeline into Queensland. And Santos certainly needs more gas for its export hub in Gladstone. Analysts from Credit Suisse say the company's LNG export hub is running so low on gas, Santos will probably need to buy more than a third of the gas it's already sold for export from other gas producers. So will Santos sell gas to New South Wales for less than what they can sell it for in Asia? The New South Wales Energy Minister has some doubts.
One thing I can tell you is that we are moving towards an international price. We are moving away from a marketplace that traditionally has been there just for domestic usage, of course with a domestic price, moving to an international price. Will international prices come down? Well, there are some forecasts that say that they will, as supply meets that demand.
In fact, this year, Santos told analysts that it wanted to raise the domestic gas price. Matt Grudnoff is from the progressive think tank, the Australia Institute.
The price was always going to rise. The gas industry knew this. In fact, Credit Suisse Research basically talked to Santos and was complaining that their LNG facility, which would be the last to be constructed, was basically creating an oversupply into the export market. That is, Credit Suisse thought that there wasn't enough gas for export to make that LNG facility viable. And Santos turned around and told them that building the LNG facility wasn't about it being profitable, but rather it was about raising the domestic gas price.
The vast gas fields underneath the Pilliga are the biggest undeveloped coal seam gas fields in New South Wales. To get to that gas, Santos is trialling a form of horizontal drilling, which involves drilling down into a coal seam and then drilling horizontally through the coal. In a book commissioned by Santos to celebrate 60 years of oil and gas production in Australia, Santos Vice President for Eastern Australia, James Balderstone, said that drilling horizontal wells was only possible if the gas price rose from $3 to $4 a gigajoule to $10 a gigajoule. In other words, Santos needed the price of gas to triple in order to make the Pilliga project viable. While gas customers are understandably concerned about their bills, farmers out around the Pilliga are afraid that if Santos gets the go-ahead, the environmental costs could be much higher.
We unload the grain here, we clean it. It goes up into that 1-ton hopper box, where it just sits.
David Chadwick runs a feedlot near Canamble. While he's 150 kilometres southwest of the Pilliga gas fields, he says the water beneath the Pilliga is the lifeblood of the entire region, and he doesn't feel like he can trust politicians to protect it.
And the more the people are looking at this, the more cranky they're getting about the betrayal and their frustration with government that they're not listening.
How do you feel when you hear Santos and then politicians talking about the gas shortage that's going to come as a result of the Pilliga not perhaps getting approval?
They hadn't sold it to all over the world instead of perhaps looking after their own backyard first. Perhaps we wouldn't have this problem. That infuriates me. Do none of these politicians have any vision beyond the next election? No. Who wrote into this thing that we give it away to the rest of the world, lock ourselves into world parity so we had no control over the pricing, and starve ourselves of the capacity to compete in a manufacturing sector?
David Chadwick says the corruption scandals that have engulfed both major parties in New South Wales have made people distrust the government.
And I think that's what's driving the anti-debate, is saying these guys are proving that they don't really know what they're doing. We just want them to stop until we can figure out whether this is a safe industry or not.
The Pilliga forest, where Santos is planning to sink its gas wells, is particularly precious to farmers because it sits directly above the recharge area for the Great Artesian Basin. The need to protect this resource has driven dozens of otherwise conservative farmers to chain themselves to Santos drilling rigs. One of those farmers is 71-year-old Neil Kennedy. He says people don't understand how critical it is that that water be protected.
Now, we out in the bush really understand that. We've been thirsty. Most people haven't. Most people aren't truly aware. Water's everywhere. We're surrounded by bloody water. Water's everywhere. They really do not understand the importance of water. Out here, we do. We do understand water. We have to maintain our own pumps. We maintain windmills and overhead tanks and gravity feed, and we do all the things in the world. dig dams in the ground and things to trap water and keep it.
Neil Kennedy's concerns are shared by the National Water Commission, which has said that if coal seam gas is not adequately managed and regulated, it could have significant long-term adverse impacts on surface and groundwater systems.
Yeah, you can drink it, it's warm.
Oh, it's warm, yeah.
If you can walk down there without doing it, hold that
Yeah,
thing,
sure.
hold on to that post so you don't end up in there. And if you want to drink it, you can. You'll notice there's a slight odour to it.
Out here, farmers rely entirely on groundwater from the underground aquifers of the Great Artesian Basin. Neil Kennedy is worried about the potential for coal seam gas drilling to threaten the purity of these aquifers.
That is one of our problems, is making all the people who don't live on the land aware of the absolute importance of water. And, you know, until we can create that awareness, we're going to have trouble with politicians. And most of the politicians have never been thirsty.
Neil Kennedy is concerned about the water that Santos will have to extract from the coal seams to get at the gas. This water, which has been trapped in the coal seam for millions of years, is very salty and contains chemical pollutants.
With this coal seam gas mining, they first have to get all the water out of that coal seam before they can bring the gas out. And in that seam, there's every type of bad chemical in the world, and they're all, you know, whatever they are. And they bring that to the top, and they have to put that in ponds and top to try to, and they say they don't know how to get rid of it. They have no idea how they're going to dispose of that salt.
This salty water is a big problem for coal seam gas companies. In the Pilliga alone, Santos says it will bring up 50 tonnes of salt a day. Over the 25-year life of the project, that's the equivalent of filling the Melbourne cricket ground almost 1/4 full of salt.
They don't know what they're going to do with it, how they're going to dispose of these chemicals in these evaporative ponds that they put there. The water evaporates, but the bad stuff they're bringing up is still there on the ground. And
So
they do not know, none of it. They'll say, oh, we'll think of something one day. But that's no good. You know, a flood will come through and we'll wash all that into our river systems and our creeks and gullies and everywhere else. It'll not just contaminate our water, it'll contaminate our soil.
And that's already happened in the Pilliga. Tony Pickard has taken background briefing to view the site of several coal seam gas water spills. We're standing here at the disused Bahina gas field.
Now, if you have a look, I mean, I refer to it as the tide mark. You can see the death and destruction up until the trees, all the way around it.
How big is this area roundabouts?
Around about 4 hectares, because it not only is here, it goes round in an S shape behind here and up around there.
Tony Pickard is a semi-retired grazier and former marine engineer who's appointed himself as the unofficial regulator of coal seam gas in the Pilliga. The contamination site he's taken background briefing to happened in 2000 when the American oil and gas company, Forest Oil, was first exploring here. 14 years ago, the pond that was holding all the salty produced water from the coal seams collapsed and the salty water spilled into the forest.
In the old days, they didn't care what happened. I mean, the water was a byproduct. Get rid of it any way we bloody can. That's not, let's just pour it into a dam. Evaporation takes place, you know what I mean? That's fine. And that's what they're doing. They're just pouring it into there.
Do you think there is any permanent damage from what's happened here, or?
14 years ago. Is it growing yet? I mean, let's be honest. It's not growing. Of course it's permanent damage. I mean, you know, any of the spill sites have got permanent damage.
For the past 6 years, Tony Pickard has reported several spills to the government. He's also documented the salinity levels in the soil, and he's even tracking the progress of revegetation efforts here, and it doesn't look good.
Oh, there's me little mate. I've been watching him, and I could never find him. He's not healthy. 4 months ago I saw him. He should have been higher than this. Okay, there's a little gum tree on the middle of Bahina too. He's still struggling.
It's the same story in the nearby Bibblewindi State Forest, another part of the Pilliga, where there was another coal seam water spill. This time, another company, which Santos had a big stake in, spilt 10,000 litres of salty coal seam gas water into the forest in 2011.
And how far does this sort of trail of destruction here go into the forest?
300 metres, come up here. And it's growing in the 12 months, well, since 2012, when I first saw it and photographed it. it's grown about 10 metres.
Right, so there've actually been more killed over time.
Yeah, because they've irrigated here and it's rained on it and it's taken the salt. Now, I can tell you, we had soil samples checked here. They were black. The material I sent away was black. 8,000 parts per million sodium in the soil, surface soil.
And that's compared to what you were saying was more like 25 on an average.
Yeah, that's correct. We don't know what was in the pond. They've never told us. So we don't know. But if you've still got a soil content on the surface of 8,000 sodium levels, it ain't real brilliant. We had a high bicarbonate level as well. Now, bicarbonates make the place alkali. So not only is the sodium killed, this is acid areas. These trees are built for acid. You've turned the pH from 5.6 to 10. You know, they can't survive.
Santos denied knowledge of the spill at the time that it happened. They told the New South Wales Land and Environment Court they didn't know about it until they took a controlling stake in Eastern Star Gas. The court fined Santos $52,000. Just a couple of 100 metres away, behind a fence, is another leaking holding pond. The aquifer beneath this pond is now contaminated with uranium 20 times higher than the safe water drinking guidelines. Santos and the EPA say the aquifer is not being used. Santos was fined $1,500, and that case is now part of a parliamentary investigation into the New South Wales EPA. The coal seam gas water coming out of the Narrabri gas fields will produce 50 tonnes of salt a day. This is a toxic byproduct, and they don't know how to dispose of it. Santos Vice President James Balderstone says the company is looking at options.
Yes, we've got a couple of options there. The options are either to re-inject it back under the ground into salty aquifers or crystallise it and put it into landfill. And we're working through that part of our EIS now about what we finally do with that.
There is a lot of disquiet from people up at Narrabri about what's going to happen with that salt. So can you understand why at this point answers like that there is a variety of options aren't really good enough for people who are very concerned about what is actually going to happen with this salt?
Well, I think a lot of people in Narrabri, and I think a number of people also see that dealing with waste from any operation, there are opportunities for people also to be involved in dealing with the waste side effects.
Wastewater expert Stuart Kahn says the only real option Santos has is landfill.
And so to dispose of salt in a landfill usually means building what we would call a monocell, a landfill site that would take nothing but that particular type of waste. And it would need to be very carefully lined, usually with double lined with impermeable liners and very well controlled and a very carefully selected site in order to make sure that that salt is not mobilised back into the environment. The big issue with salt is that it doesn't break down. It lasts forever. So if you build a landfill site, it doesn't really matter how good your impermeable liner is or how good your structure is, whether it lasts 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, it still has a finite lifespan. So ultimately, it's not a final solution for that salt.
Associate Professor Stuart Kahn specialises in wastewater management. He was commissioned by the New South Wales Chief Scientist to write a report on the produced water from coal seam gas. He found that the industry had a complete lack of solutions to dispose of the salt. Stuart Kahn says storing the salt in landfill is only a temporary solution and carries significant environmental risk. If there is heavy rain in the landfill area, he says, the salt could escape.
And you'll have contamination of local streams and groundwater systems as a consequence. So it's a temporary storage solution until we can come up with something better. And I'm afraid that's where the story ends at the moment. There is no something better.
In his submission to the state's inquiry into coal seam gas, Stuart Kahn said that regulators and other decision makers in New South Wales are faced with a severe lack of guidance, support, knowledge and experience for overseeing the safe management of coal seam gas activities.
I work with a water utility in New South Wales who were finding that there were coal seam gas companies coming along who were proposing to produce coal seam gas in their drinking water catchment, and the water utility was asked to provide their feedback. But as you can imagine, with an under-resourced New South Wales local government, agency, that proposal went to one of their scientific officers or environmental officers, who I think was 2 years out of university at the time.
In his submission, he said there were a lot of outstanding questions about how coal seam gas is going to be managed, and as yet, there are few answers.
And I think that's a big part of that problem, that there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of experience, and therefore a lack of capability to be able to answer some of the questions that you're asking. What are the risks? What are the concerns?
And that's exactly what farmers around the Pilliga want to know. David Chadwick.
Go away and do your own homework. Question what you're being told. Question what we're telling you. You know, we want everybody to question what they're hearing from both sides of the debate, because we have no motivation to sink this industry. What possible good could that come for us? We're Australians. We want to see Australia prosper. But you don't trash the joint as you're going through in the quest for a cheap buck. We must take a longer vision.
Background Briefing's coordinating producer is Linda McGuinness. Research by Anna Whitfeld. Technical production by Joe Wallace. The executive producer is Wendy Carlisle, and I'm Jess Hill.
Next.
Well, Tony Abbott, Liberal gas export attack on Australia in order to allow the shareholders of the companies who hold the leases and the export licenses, in order to allow those shareholders to make a fat profit by selling high-priced gas to the Asian market. What's left of the Australian economy is about to be crippled by a 300% increase in the price of gas. The bottle that cost me $5 to fill is going to cost $15. The contracts are already signed. There's a commitment to supply the gas, even though there's no actual established, proved reserve that's connected to supply the pipeline. And Tony Abbott's patting himself on the back for saying what a great thing it is. Ian McFarlane with the gravelly voice, he thinks it's a great idea. And in their efforts to secure the gas, not only are they going to triple the price of gas in the Australian domestic situation, but they're destroying the entire water table of the Western Flatlands and stockpiling salt at the head of the bloody river system. I mean, not totally the head, they're not stockpiling salt in ponds right up here, but go 100, 150 miles west of here, and that's precisely what they're doing. Well, all that stuff drains into the Darling. What they're doing is making absolutely certain that there's no viable water to irrigate with after the next round of drought, fire, flood disasters. I hate to say this, VB Ed, but the Liberal government in Western Australia, the state Liberal government over there, seems to be in a much better position than all the Liberal governments over here in the eastern side of the country. We seem to have concentrated a bunch of dills and nongs, complete morons, absolute second-rate, shallow party yes-men who can't see beyond the next crony capitalist crooked backroom deal that ensures them a high-priced job as a lobbyist as soon as they get out of government. So the Western Australian economy is guaranteed 15% of all the gas extracted for domestic use. The United States is having a manufacturing revival led by cheap gas prices, by fracking their landscape. So they might be smashing their landscape, but they're generating some jobs and getting their economy going again. But oh no, not down the eastern seaboard of Australia. Tony Abbott seems to be absolutely intent on reducing the Australian culture and society and civilisation into a broken third world remnant. I want to know who Tony Quisling Abbott is doing this for. Who are the next lot of colonial rulers that he's got lined up to use us as serfs after he's broken the Australian economy and infrastructure of civilization? Warbles on a lot to YouTube. It's like Tony Abbott's using natural gas as a levy to blow Australia out of existence. Ciao.